Hi, everybody. It is Monday, June 13th. And on today's show, we are talking about the ever revolving door of women's college basketball and the transfer portal. We are going to go to the East and talk and head into ACC country. It starts right now.
You are Locked On Women's Basketball, your daily podcast on women's basketball. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hi, everybody. I am Missy Heidrick, National Women's College Basketball correspondent at the Next. So happy to have you here on Locked On Women's Basketball. Thank you for making us your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. And today's episode is brought to you by Bet Online. Bet Online has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. Bet Online, where the game starts. I am so happy to be joined today by Adler, one of the outstanding journalists that covers a multitude of things at the Next. And that not only is college basketball, but also the WNBA and the Seattle Storm beat. But also has the luxury of living in the great state of North Carolina, so right in the heart of ACC country, and no one better to talk to than So hi, how are you?
Well, always excited to talk about the ACC, one of the best conferences in the country, and certainly going to be really exciting this year.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's start in your home state. So let's start in North Carolina because we've got 4 schools of part of the ACC universe that reside right there. Let's start first with Wake Forest. A lot of change going on at Wake Forest. They let Jennifer Hoover go after 10 years as the head coach there, a former alum at Wake, but they now have a new hire. What are you hearing maybe on the streets, if anything, about what's going on in Winston-Salem?
With Wake Forest being the smallest private school in Power 5, I can't say that I have too many sources there. It's certainly an interesting turn for them. They let go of the head coach, as you said, and for what Wake Forest is, it was a really surprising move. They are not a school that is going to be contending for NCAA appearances year in, year out. One year when there is a big deal for them. Consistent WNIT appearances is really an accomplishment more than coaching, because you're limited by size, you're limited because you're stuck right next to the triangle and the big schools that are there, but you're farther away from that center talent, and you have tighter funds, tighter budget, course facilities, that sort of thing. Given the fact that they still have a player like June Spear, and with the moderate success that they've been having relative to their own standards, it was a surprising move. And she's in the middle of their contract. That's a school that doesn't have that much money to buy people out. They had to buy her out. So it's quite interesting to see what might emerge, or certainly what direction they go in on the court in the next few years.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's start with NC State and UNC first, and then we'll talk about your school and where you reside. But first, NC State. This is a team 32-4 last season. Westmore obviously is building a dynasty, so to speak, in Raleigh. But I think the question is, when you take a player like Elise Cunan out of the lineup, what happens? But he has been so good in finding, no pun intended, those diamonds in the rough out of the portal. And someone like Diamond Johnson, who came on the scene last year from Rutgers to NC State and was an impact player from the get-go.
Of course. They're going to have problems. They're also going to be good. Let me make that clear. They've really run the ACC for the past couple of years, and I don't want to say it's not great, because people definitely outside of the ACC appreciate what they're doing, but it seems that inside the ACC it's somehow what they appreciated. Last year at preseason media day, you had a number of head coaches, like Jeff Waltz, like Fortner, Neil Ivey. Many head coaches were talking about how strong the conference was, and it really was. It was a very strong conference last year. We were talking about how the conference champion could really end up having like 4 or 5 losses just because of the depth of talent. I remember before the season, I turned to a couple other Duke women's basketball beats, and I turned to Mitchell Northam, another ACC reporter, next, and I said, I think they're crazy. And Mitchell and I agreed they were crazy because NC State was so good coming into the season. NC State ends up winning those regular season conference title with just two conference losses. They're not going to do that anymore. Like you said, they lost Grenade. But she's not the only starter they're going to be missing. Point guard Brandon Grace is gone. One of the best two-way players in the country, and 3-and-D guard, and Kai Crutchfield is gone as well. There's a lot of holes to fill, let's say. They're going to have a really good backcourt next year. You not only have DJ, like you mentioned, you also return Shaquille Brown Turner, who's just a really steady, polished presence there, and you're adding one of the best transfers in the entire world, Tanai Rivers, a slasher, 6-foot wing flash ball forward out of South Carolina. She's got some dynamism. She's going to have some real rim pressure to a team that desperately needs it. They brought in a stretch for Mimi Collins out of Maryland. And like you talked about Diamonds in the Rough, one of the ones you might be looking at is River Baldwin out of Florida State. She's a solid back-to-the-basket scorer. She knows where to be on defense, so she can at least, help plug and play in the system. And Camille Hobby, who was Canadian's backup, she's a very serviceable backup. She could be a decent, certainly playable starter and a rotation player with Baldwin, depending on whether they more defense or offense. They're going to be interesting. They're going to contend, but certainly they're no longer really running the show.
Yeah, I think they are, as you said, they're going to be one of those teams where I don't know if it's necessarily going to be surprising people. However, maybe not as dominant as we have seen them in the past. Now, if we go to North Carolina, which had maybe one of the youngest rosters in the country last year, but they finished 25 and 7, and Courtney Banghart kind of figuring out exactly the type of player that she wants. They haven't been or made as much of a splash in that transfer portal, but I think one of the biggest news stories that people have been following in college basketball is the fact that Carly Littlefield will not be back at North Carolina. And what kind of hole does that leave, and how do they fill it?
Yeah, I mean, it's bad news for them, of course. Carly Littlefield is really steady presence with the ball in her hand. She makes good reads. She can get the ball where it needs to go. And as a shooter, she's just dynamite. Obviously, it sucks that they're not going to have her back. On the bright side, you have a number of rising sophomores, rising juniors, played the past few years, really solid. Deja Kelly, after looking really just like she didn't know how to get the ball in the basket efficiently, emphasis on efficiently her freshman year, was able to really improve her 3-point shot last year. 2-point shot's not great. She's able to get the ball again. She's able to get the ball in score. She makes good reads. She's as the combo guard. She shoots quite well off the ball. She's a hell of a player. This defense is looking good. When you have players like you have Deja Kelly, and you have how Kennedy Todd Williams emerged last year. They're solid players. As far as the portal, funny enough, they haven't really done anything to replace that experience of Carly Littlefield. It seems like they're really relying on internal development and just that sort of thing to improve. I shouldn't say to improve, sort of to make up for that lack of veteran leadership. They have coming in first year have a huge but what they do have is they have a couple 6'3" players in Tiani Key and Kaylee McPherson, who are both really well regarded. First was around composite top 25, he was a composite top 10. Last year, they were both hurt and did not play the freshman season. They're getting length. It's going to be interesting to see what happens. They're not adding a whole lot of height for another couple of years, but they're going to have a lot of length and do some things to make sense.
Well, and I think that North Carolina is one of those interesting, as you said, haven't done a lot in the portal, but it's also maybe a different kind of philosophy that you don't necessarily have to go and just sign, and gather out of the portal, that what you do grow internally, kind of that grassroots mentality, can be the long-term sustaining that Courtney Banghart's looking for her program. If we flip the switch and just go, what is it, 8 miles from Chapel Hill to Durham, I think, right? That's what everybody says. It's like 8 to 10 miles. So if we drive to Durham and to your institution at Duke, It wasn't a fantastic season last year for Kara Lawson, 17-13. She did go to the portal in that COVID season and in that time, and she went heavy into the portal into that first season. Maybe not necessarily the outcome that everyone thought they would have. She's continuing to build through that portal and utilize it. What does it look like heading into this 22-23 season?
Yeah, so when you want to build a program, you can do it Bangor did, which is they brought in some. She brought in some transfers early on. A couple of those were just returning players who left because of the problems that Hatchell was affecting towards the end of her tenure. But if you're not immediately recruiting at that top 2, top 5, top 10 national level, which Boston hasn't made it there, but if you want to contend immediately, you're not in the mood for a multi-year rebuild, dip into the portal. She brought in a number of players last year who, I've had my mea culpa. I thought they were better than they actually were. They had some problems there. And one of the things you run into as well is when you bring in so many different players from so many different backgrounds, roster cohesion is really tricky. Duke didn't have that last year. They are retaining a number of players who were together last year. When you go through something like that together, you build some sort of chemistry together. You have those bonds. They are still in the some high-profile transfers. I'm probably on multiple occasions going to call them the Duke Beavers this year. They brought in 2 different front court players from Oregon State. Essentially, once Oregon State's Taylor Jones went out with an ACL injury and had a third way to the year, Beavers brought in a hired their front court, joined their director of player development and recruiting, Goodman, who was an Oregon State Beaver legend. Former teammates, Ty Carsdale, who's like a 4, she can 3. Kenny Brown, she's a center, one of the better rim protectors in the country. And this is a team that really needs solid play. Really just needed some help on both ends. Players who were able to do the little stuff on both ends, because they had standout point of attack defenders last year. They had excellent lead offensive guard play. And they need to complement players. Adding rim protection, exactly what they needed. Adding a bit of shooting in sort of the combo forward scale, again, exactly what they needed. Doing that stuff. They also brought in a rising sophomore out of Georgia, Brady Richardson. She's a long wing defender who should help them in some decent ways defensively. This is a team that I think can play some truly excellent defensive lineups. If they want to be able to score, then it's tricky because they're going to be relying on some high-profile freshmen. They're going to be relying on some freshmen and some previously inefficient guards to handle the scoring.
All right, so in our next segment, we are going to talk about 2 more ACC teams, one of which was at the Final Four and one which was making a run before a very tough loss to another as well. Okay, but first, do you find yourself consistently signing up for subscriptions that are impossible to cancel? Never pay for an unwanted subscription again with Truebill. Truebill is the new app that helps you identify and stop paying for subscriptions you do not need, want, or simply forgot about. On average, people save up to $720 a year with Truebill. Because companies make subscriptions hard to cancel, Truebill makes it incredibly simple. You just link your accounts and Truebill will cancel your unwanted subscriptions in one tap. And your Truebill concierge is there when you need them to cancel unwanted subscriptions, so you do not have to. Over 2 million users and has helped save them $1 million with Truebill. So don't fall for the subscription scams. Start canceling today at Truebill.com/ go right now, Truebill.com. It could save you thousands of dollars. Truebill.com/ locked on. I am Missy Heidrick, and thank you for making Locked On Women's Basketball your first listen every day. The ultimate NBA mock draft starts June 16th in 3 days. With over 50 insiders, nothing equals the ultimate NBA mock draft. The Locked On NBA Big Board Draft experts plus the Audacity insiders. First pick is June 16th. Search Ultimate NBA Mock Draft and follow now so you do not miss a pick. All right, M. Adler, Two teams that I find always fascinating every year. They're going to be in the mix, but one we know because they're coming off a Final Four run, and that is the Louisville Cardinals. I think a little bit kind of like Wes Moore is that it seems like every season Jeff Walls just finds that diamond in the rough. He finds himself the right type of transfers. And he also gets the other people on his roster to buy in, to bringing those people in and finding that cohesion. Um, where does this group go, knowing that they were 29-5 last year, made it to the Final Four, but it's going to look a little bit different when you take out players like Kiana Smith, Chelsea Hall, and Emily Inkster, who's really made a splash in the WNBA?
Honestly, your guess is as good as mine because I'm fascinated. I'm fascinated to see what happens in this group. Like you mentioned, you're losing Emily Inkster, the number 4 overall pick. I had her 4th on my draft board. She was dynamite last year. There was no better front court defender in the country. Or I should say there was no better front court defender in the country at defending the entirety of the court. And she really ran that defense. Jeff Waltz, he's one of the best coaches in the country at adapting his schemes to his players, and they completely overhauled what they were doing on defense last year to really feature her ability. She's listed at 6'1". I'm convinced her wingspan is at least 6'5". To really feature her all over the court because she's a point of attack defender, she's a help defender, she's anything you need. And she really ran the show there. Chelsea Hall was a hell of a chaser and a point of attack defender for that guard. And Kiana Smith is just was one of the most effective shooters in the country for 2 years. Who are they bringing in? A couple names. Morgan Jones is real good out of Florida State. She's a good scoring wing. She's got that length. She doesn't really play to that length. It does allow her to get off that jump shot without being blocked out too easily. She had scoring. She has a little bit of creation, but it's not exactly making up for Angela Smith. They're also bringing in just a solid game managing point guard, Crystal Carr, who was at Texas Tech before she went to Syracuse last year. But yeah, Morgan Jones is quite good. She's a good two-way player. I like her, but this is a lot of high production to replace. They have a big freshman class coming in. You have like 4 or 5 composite top 70 recruits. Just in terms of our composite board, it's headlined by the number 29 Alexia Mobley and number 37 Ella Harris, number 39 Zion Walker. Some of these players are kind of tall. It's all nobody's too small, nobody's too big. And that's a problem that they've had for a couple of years. So they have their work cut out. They're going to be talented, but they're in a big group right now.
Absolutely. I mean, I loved Emily Inkster's game. I just think she brought so much to the floor, and she was an impact player for them. But I think one of the people that made the most impact for them was Kiana Smith. Especially watching them in person up close in the NCAA tournament during their Sweet 16 and Elite 8. I mean, they were just so much better when she is on the floor, and that is tough to replace, whether it's some of those younger players that were freshmen last year moving on or the incoming class. I think there are huge shoes to fill there. All right. Now, one other team in the ACC that just is intriguing to me because of both players coming in and players going out via the portal. But this is year 3 now for Niele Ivey at Notre Dame. And I think if you ask anybody, say, you know what, you've got all the tools in the toolbox to get the very best talent and very best players to Notre Dame. So what does this look like going forward for the Fighting Irish? And can they continue to kind of build back up to where I think the expectation is for the success of this program?
I'll go on with a little bit of a limb here. I'll say that it is distinctly possible that where they go is they have one of the 4 or 5 best top 6, top 7 in the rotation in the country. We've seen what they can do. They are returning everyone from the starting lineup. They are losing, and the first 3 players on the bench are 9 people: Sam Brunelle and Adler.
Right.
Nebraska didn't really play much. She's the kind of player that I describe as being good at the things that you don't want to do at all. Anaya Peebles is a solid power guard. She set good screens. She crashed the boards when she needed to, and she was effective for her height. again, she's not someone who's adding a whole lot of value to a team. Sam Brunelle is someone who a lot of people like. You can look at her shooting over the years. It's her billing really is as a tall shooter. You look at her shooting over the years. The hype at this point, it's been 2 or 3 years and it's still theoretical. So again, they really are not losing much with that. They are bringing in. Pretty impressive. Bringing in Lauren Ebo, Texas starting center. She's a big body. She doesn't necessarily jive perfectly with how Maya Dotson played last year, which is flashy, it's long, it's rangy, it's all over the court. It's really charging down the lane. Ebo's a back to the basket presence really on both ends, but that is a way of styling that, given how some teams in the country are constructed, you want to be able to play. Outside, you're bringing in Kylie Watson, who's a really solid big out of Oregon. There's stuff to lock in her game. She's got pick and roll capabilities, which Notre Dame loves to run their pick and rolls. And there's every chance in the world that she could just be that solid big a player who we thought was going to be that sort of long-term center for them. 6'5", Annalisa Marshall. At this point, is a rising junior, and she's barely played the first 2 years. She's really high profile, but injuries just haven't worked out for her. And there are also a couple of good freshmen. There's a named Rakaya Beal, who's our composite before, but more importantly, they are bringing in for another year in a row a top 20 sort of combo guard, point guard, off one guard, it's hard to tell from the scouting report. But the composite number 14 in KK Bransford out of Cincinnati. She's supposed to be a good shooter, and look, this team can do a lot of offense.
Yeah, they're going to be. I mean, I think they're loaded, and I think you had 2 freshmen last year that really kind of came onto the scene that made their mark nationally. But then you add some of these other pieces, and having seen Lauren Ebo in person, she will work. I mean, possession after possession. If you don't do that for Vic Schaefer, you don't play at Texas. She learned how to do that. And I think of also seeing Kylie Watson in person and just love the physical makeup that you see there. I mean, she is explosive and strong and will very much, I think, be one of those kind of players that if they could get in that pick and roll game and find some action, that she could take up space and she could score. And that is what you're looking for in that game. And it kind of comes back to that pro style a little bit. And that's what you're seeing, I think, and what you might see a little bit more out of Notre Dame. All right, so we're going to talk about 2 more schools that have kind of interesting trajectories in just a moment when in our next segment. But we also want to say that Bet Online is our #1 source for all your betting stats and sports info. So you can find all of the latest sports developments, news, odds, including this year's basketball championship matchup, the NHL Hockey Conference Finals, which the Stanley Cup starts in just 2 days from now, Major League Baseball, which is hot and heavy, and of course, all the latest fighting news from MMA and UFC to boxing. BetOnline is your continued source for all of your sporting wagering information, including live betting, esports, and more. You can also find WNBA information there. That will keep you on your toes. So head to the website today and use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and actions. Bet Online, where the game starts. All right, M. Adler, let's go north a little bit first from where you are, and let's talk about Virginia Tech. They were 23-10 last year. They have one of the most dominant and I think well-rounded all-around centers in the country, 6'4", Elizabeth Kitely, but she needs help. And it seems as though that they may have been able to do that with probably one of the top transfers that entered the portal landing in Blacksburg.
That is certainly correct. So just to pull back the curtain, we're talking about point guard Ashley Wusu out of Maryland right here. Ashley Wusu, who for some reason the national awards have decided is a shooting guard, which doesn't make any sense. She's been one of the assistant leaders for every year she's been in college. Anyway, she's coming down to Virginia Tech here. She's going to be here for, I believe, 1 or 2 years.
I think she'll have 2 years. I think she'll have 2 years because of the extra eligibility in the COVID scenario. Because that pendulum is still swinging and slowing down, but I believe she's going to end up with 2 years now.
Yeah, that sounds good. thing about her game is that last year she was clearly hobbled and injured and not herself for most of the season, really. There's so much to like about her game at the college level. Her court vision is incredible. Her ability to get to her spot in the mid-range and just nail everything from the elbow, from the free throw line, just as a jumper, is nearly unmatched. The way she can take anyone off the dribble, get there, pull up, turn around, got it. And that's something this offense hasn't had. This offense really has not had someone who you can, you go through the play for 16 seconds of the clock, and if you don't do anything, you put the ball in someone's hands and say, hey, can you get a shot here? That right now for the team is Ashley Wilson. She is pretty much directly replacing Asia Shepherd, sort of a combo guard, off-ball guard. Leading scorer in Virginia Tech history, 5 years there. Was second-round pick by the Las Vegas Aces this year. And, year in, year out, Shepherd was, without fail, one of the most lethal shooters in the country. And that really, really worked with Kenny Brooks' style, because he's someone who likes to spread the floor and run a lot of off-ball screens, run players off screens, run players downhill, uphill, run a lot of different funky actions, and it results in a lot of moving threes, a lot of open shots. And that was right up Shepherd's alley. That was her specialty. That was right up Georgia Amor, who is their point guard, and will split duty with Lucy. That's right up her alley as well. That was it for Kayla King, their combo forward, and Kiana Traylor, who was a wing they brought in from Purdue last year. Traylor, by the way, is coming back for another season, so she's going to be. They're going to have a lot of better leadership as well. They're also. So yeah, Owusu does not necessarily conform in that, so it's going to be very interesting to see how that system works. Another high-profile transfer who doesn't necessarily conform with that as well is Taylor Soule. They're bringing in that combo forward from Boston College. She's a decent defender, but offensively she's money from the mid-range. She crashes the boards well. She sees the floor. Very good. She's also someone who's not a three-point shooter. She's kind of replacing Azan Paynes, who functioned as a sort of occasional combo or occasional power forward, often like a backup small big. But Soule was not going to be someone who just plays 10 minutes a game off the bench. She's good, and she can score.
Yeah, I think it'll be really interesting as well, because like you said, is when you have a player like that who's coming back and for those additional season, that's also part of this whole transfer portal movement and craziness that we've seen over the last few years, is that some teams don't necessarily have to go get as much quote unquote experience out of the portal because they've got it coming back on their own roster. So it looks different in other places and people don't necessarily put that piece together, but somebody using that additional year now really can make a big difference in that experience factor. And for a team like Virginia Tech, I see them not being towards the middle. I mean, I think this will be a team that will contend at the very top of the ACC this year. Yeah. All right. So now let's go back south and hit the bottom of the ACC trail down there in Florida and at Florida State. Now, such an interesting story because after 20 plus years, Sue Sammarau has decided to retire. She was not on the bench during that COVID season to deal with her family issues. She came back last season. Brooke Wyckoff has been a familiar face with Florida State women's basketball, but it is different when you are an assistant, an associate head coach, and even the interim head coach. It's different when you actually sit in that head coaching chair. So now Brooke Wyckoff takes that position there at Florida State, and they've had people, if we've noticed, even some interconference transfers going to other schools within the ACC. But looking for grad transfers, looking for experience, what do you think that this Florida State team looks like heading into 22-23?
By their own historical standards, rough. Look, we just talked about Virginia Tech and how good they've been and how good they're going to be. And they were really nothing until Kenny Brooks arrived and helped and built that program up, really. And sports are zero-sum game. Every time someone wins a game, someone loses a game. So for one program to rise, another program has to fall. And if you're looking for the biggest faller over the past decade, that means Florida State. Florida State was, it's not that they've just been like continually getting worse over the past number of years. I mean, they were ranked in the top 20 at points to Kyle Gillespie's 2 years of tenure there back in 2018, 2019. And they were a good team, don't get me wrong. But you look at the recruiting, you look at the direction of that program and see, it's for now, its best days are behind. It's still good. Brooke Wyckoff is a really good coach. We've really known this move was coming for a while. Like you said, in the year that Sue was out, Brooke was the acting head coach. She has been right by Sue's side for a number of years. She really has been almost splitting head coaching duties for a number of years. So it was actually surprising to see all the transfers that left. Grad transfers, you should really never be surprised by any grad transfer going somewhere, just because degrees are what they are. A 1 year rental is what it is. But they had some undergraduate transfers that ended up going to include Timmy Basis went down to USF. So it was a little surprising in that sense. So they're going to have some younger players taking the reins. They came along a little towards the end of last year. They started playing the younger players more. They will be interesting in a sense to see how good they can make that talent, because it is talent.
Absolutely. I think one of the other things as we look at a couple of the grad transfers that are coming in, just announced just a few days ago, Brianna Turnedge, who is coming, I think she had spent time at Virginia Tech, coming into Florida State. But I think the two that are very interesting to me is Jasmine Messingill from Kentucky. She had prior been at Tennessee. We know that she's a scorer. I think she had a very good year at Kentucky. And then the one that I find to be intriguing and whether or not the game will transfer in the way they want it to is Taylor O'Brien. She comes from Bucknell, averaged almost 17 a game as a scoring guard there. Can that game transfer? It is that one of the bumps that this Florida State team is going to need.
That is a good question, because when you talk about someone coming from the school like that, I have no idea. I see the number, it looks good. Clearly there's some talent there. But I frankly have, it's much harder to score going from there to the ACC. But frankly, I have no idea how to translate that. I sort of just say, hey, look, we're scoring. And I wish I could tell you. Jasmine Massengill is interesting. They're losing sort of combo guard / wing handling that Bianca Jackson took care of. So Jasmine Massengill is very much sort of college combo guard. She was overtaxed at Kentucky like most of their talent, just because apart from Ryan Howard, they didn't have that top end talent, so everyone else had to play up a bit. She was playing among more the guard talent, so she'll be able to be off the ball as a shooter more, which will be good for sort of secondary playmaking and passing. She's offered, that's good veteran leadership. Someone who's been in conference championships, been in Sweet 16, just to really help stabilize the ship while adding good basketball.
Yeah. All right. So for all of our ACC friends out there, we know we didn't talk about all of the schools, but these were some of the ones that have really, I think, caught my eye that you and I have talked a little bit about that just have question marks, but will be, I think some of those teams are going to rise to the top of this league. For those that haven't found the daily briefing at the Next, please do, because it is the brainchild of M. Adler. So 7 days a week, you can find the daily briefing. It is an amazing compilation of all information that you need, not only about the college game, but also the WNBA, which is hot and heavy right now. So in just a quick second, M, who covers the Seattle Storm beat, tell me what to look for this week with the Seattle Storm.
Seattle Storm this week, it's interesting because they don't really have too tough of a schedule ahead of them. It's a little relaxing. You have some hard games against Dallas. You take a little time off, play the Lakes with Liberty. In between, they go to Connecticut. That's going to be a marquee matchup.
All right, so that's it. Connecticut this week. And M, where does everybody find you as they're perusing out there looking for women's basketball and WNBA info?
Of course, they can always find me at thenexthoops.com. Of course, writing the daily briefing on the Storm. I'm also directing whatever special projects come up with us throughout the year. As you mentioned, you'll find me in your inbox if you subscribe to us many times a week. As well, you can find me on Twitter at M_Adler.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for being here. And we want to thank everybody for listening and watching and getting all of your women's hoops info right here at Locked On Women's Basketball. You can find me, Missy Heidrick, at Missy Heidrick on Twitter, and all of my amazing colleagues and everything and all the information that you want at The Next Tube. Follow us there at The Next Tubes and at Locked On Women's Basketball. Thank you for making Locked On Women's Basketball your first listen every day. Make sure to go check out Locked On NBA Big Board. Host Rafael Barlow from NBA Draft Junkies and author of the NBA Big Board newsletter is joined by Richard Stamen, Sam Ferris, and Leif Thulin, giving fans an in-depth look into the NBA draft, which is coming up in just a couple weeks, mock draft, player rankings, and of course, big boards. It's free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you so much for joining us here on Locked On Women's Basketball. Stay tuned all week. We have got you covered.